Hello and welcome. In a previous video, I talked about the Dark Empath and explored some of the relatively recent research that has been done in that area. I suggested that that research is really important. I believe it's groundbreaking. I think it's really useful for pretty much all of us. But then it dawned on me that that video needed a part two, because if there are dark empaths around and they can cause us some issues, how do we spot them? and if we do spot them, what do we do about it? How do we deal with them? So that's what this video is about. To help us explore that topic, I will access 4 articles. As usual, I will only talk about some elements of the articles because I encourage you to read in more depth in any of these areas that you find interesting. And what I'm going to do at the end of this video is I will provide you with a checklist, which is mine. And that checklist hopefully will help you to consider who's around you, how maybe you could spot the dark empath and what to do about it. Before we get there, we need to look at these articles. So to begin, what to know about the dark empath. So some of this is going to be a bit of a recap, but because most of this is a different set of writers, it, I believe, will add to our understanding of dark empathy. New research has identified a term known as a dark empath, which some refer to as the most dangerous personality type. And some do, and I don't think that's true. I don't think that's accurate at all. I don't think it's the most dangerous personality type, but as I said in the last video, it's probably not a walk in the park either. Note that this is not a recognised personality disorder. It's not, and that's important to be aware of, because what we have right now with a lot of people who are writing about it, including some researchers, this is conjecture. There's something in it, I'm pretty sure, but we're starting to unpack some of the stuff and pull in some threads and get a little bit more understanding in certain areas, etc. So there's quite a bit of conjecture around. I think well-founded, but that's important to bear in mind. Let's explore what the term means and what you need to know. Empathy, it begins with. To understand the dark empath, we must first have a good understanding of empathy. You've likely heard the term before and can conjure images of someone being kind and understanding. Absolutely. The American Psychological Association defines empathy as understanding a person from his or her frame of reference rather than one's own, or vicariously experiencing that persona's feelings, perceptions and thoughts. So that we have the ability to step into the shoes, look at the world through their frame or frames of reference, so that implies cognition, or stepping into the shoes and feeling what they're feeling. That implies emotion. And indeed, we have cognitive empathy. This form of empathy is logic-based and intellectual. Simply understanding that someone feels a certain way and possibly being able to correctly label that is empathy, but it's fairly limited in how useful it is. I'd say, yeah, well, it is limited, but I think it can be very powerful. Some people can really position themselves looking at the world through the other person's frame of reference and sort of figure out why they may have gotten there and what their next moves be without tuning in to any great extent to emotions. But it's limited, but it doesn't mean to say that it's not useful. It can be very useful and can be very powerful. Emotional empathy or affective empathy. Emotional empathy typically refers to when someone can feel the same emotions and sensations as other people, even when they're not the person affected. This could be related to emotions like anger and sadness, but also physical pain and discomfort. So emotional empathy, affective empathy, it's sometimes called, are talked about. These 2 types of empathy are written about by a lot of different writers, authors. However, as I mentioned in the last video, some people suggest there's a 3rd type, compassionate empathy. This form of empathy is the ideal form. Well, I kind of disagree with that, and I'll explain why in a moment. Once we have understood cognitive empathy, and felt emotional empathy. Compassionate empathy takes that information and turns it into action, moving us to help in whatever way we can. Yes, and I think this is where some writers differ. There's a sort of fork in the road. And I believe there are two types of empathy. I think compassion is an outcome of empathy. I think it's action driven. And so whilst it may be an ideal something, it is ideal to help people, I don't think it's empathy. I think it's separate. And you may consider that to be splitting hairs a little bit. And I think that's true. But as we'll see as this video goes on, I think this distinction is very important, in my opinion. Anyway, 3 traits included in the Dark Triad, bit of a recap on that: narcissism, heightened self-regard, selfishness, arrogance, Machiavellianism stemming from the infamous Niccolo Machiavelli, manipulative, deceiving, often highly intelligent, but will go to any length to achieve their desires. Psychopathy, lack of remorse, antisocial behaviour, emotionally cold and volatile. Now, with each of these Dark Triad areas, the whole point of dark empathy is that the narcissist can have empathy. They can experience it, including this emotional type, this affective empathy. The Machiavellian individual also can, and the psychopath also can. And that's the point of that research around the dark empath. And could that give these people in that dark triad an advantage? Yes, of course. And just to be clear, that there's overlap with those dark triad traits, and some people kind of have all of them, including the tetrad sadism, but we won't muddy things up by talking about that here. And also people can be much more the narcissist, the Machiavellian or the psychopath type, and be in this or have this dark empathy tendency as well. So it can be all, it can be 2, it can be 1. If that makes sense. People who are described as being high in any of the traits in the dark triad are often thought to have low empathy. While some are highly intelligent, their emotional intelligence is typically lacking. The dark empath is the exception to this. New research has explored these types of people. Researchers identified folks who scored high on dark traits and also high on empathy measures, and in doing so coined the term the dark empath. And we talked about that research, specifically quoting the researchers themselves in the last video. They studied nearly 1,000 people and looked at the classic dark traits, but also general well-being and empathy. They determined that a dark empath generally has many traits from the dark triad and couples that with a relatively high emotional intelligence or empathy. Now, I have to pick up on this. Emotional intelligence doesn't mean just empathy. That can be part of it, but there are different elements to emotional intelligence. So I think to say emotional intelligence equates to empathy isn't quite true. Sorry, got to be a bit pedantic there. But anyway, I'll continue. But this isn't to say that dark empaths are highly empathic. Oh, I thought they were. All right, park that. Going back to our earlier descriptions of the different types of empathy, dark empaths typically are highly skilled at cognitive empathy. They understand emotions very well, but struggle to translate that emotion into a motivation to help and instead use it to their advantage. Yes, they can do. That's where we need to talk about the action part, the compassion part, in a different way, because they're not only highly skilled, the dark empaths at cognitive empathy, I believe they are experiencing emotional empathy as well. But the distinction is the compassion part. And again, as we go on, I hope to make that very clear. It will be my opinion, but I hope you can at least follow the reasoning. On the surface, they may appear kind and charming, dark empath, and they may even seem more empathic than their peers. Well, according to the research, they are often more empathic. This is why it's dangerous to miss out the emotional empathy. Typically more extroverted and well liked by surface level peers. They're not people you would immediately peg as having dark traits. I think by surface level peers, it doesn't mean people who just live on the surface of the planet as opposed to the troglodytes. I think it means people that you don't get too close to, but would they get too close to them anyway? They often elicit vulnerable information or information that would make people vulnerable if it was exposed, and confessions appear to show empathy in the moment and then later weaponize that vulnerability. They make people feel heard and understood, but are doing so less for the benefit of the other person and more so to gain intelligence and trust to use later. Important to say here that other people elicit information which could leave us vulnerable if it were shared, and also appear to show empathy and later weaponize. This isn't necessarily the dark empath. Other people can do that for various other reasons. Is the dark empath the same as a narcissist? Again, from the same article, the short answer is no, but the longer answer is kind of. Yeah, I like that answer. The researchers who coined this term did so specifically because narcissists are classically thought to have little to no empathy, and dark empaths have high empathy capabilities. Yes, and now we realise that some narcissists can as well, because there are different types of narcissism, like communal, for example. So you've got to be careful when we are looking at what some people write. It's why I encourage, as I've said before, all of us to read more, to delve more deeply into these things, if interested. What to do if you suspect you have a dark empath in your life? Good, tell us. First of all, it's important to be careful with how we apply this term. Oh yes, applause, definitely. Thank you. It's tempting to want to apply a psychological term when you have had a bad experience with someone. Think about how many people are talking about narcissism, narcs these days. It's everywhere. Is it? I don't think so. Is it important we understand that they do exist and we may fall prey to them? Definitely. ADHD, same kind of thing. Label is bandied about left, right and centre. How many people actually do fall into that category? Probably less than say that they are ADHD. I would always encourage people to go and speak to a professional. Anyway, if there have been only a few small occurrences of arguing or feeling like someone brought something up unfairly to hurt you in an argument, they may simply be a poor communicator or have trouble managing strong emotions. Yes, thank you. So important to put this in perspective. Again, we read an article or watch a video and, you're a dark empath. Really? Probably not, but possibly. So we have to keep that in mind. If this seems to be an ongoing pattern and there is a clear intention to harm you and use your vulnerability against you, it's possible they're a dark empath. It is possible, but it's also almost certainly factual, true, that you need to get out of that. You need to be aware of it. Whatever the label is, ongoing pattern to harm and use your vulnerability, beware, whatever the label is. And then this article goes on. Remember, it's not your fault. Great, like this. Even if you now see the true colours, remember they are highly skilled at presenting themselves in a different way, so it would have been exceptionally difficult to know then what you do now. And once more, that might not be dark empathy. A lot of people are good at disguise, at kidding on, at trying to fool us. And sometimes themselves. Lean on supportive people in your life. Definitely identify the people in your life that make you feel loved, accepted, supported. Reconnect with people you know are caring, even if you've distanced yourself from them while you were close with the dark empath, or close to whoever this individual was who was causing you issues. Trust yourself. A dark empath will attempt to manipulate and twist your feelings. Stick to what you know is true. So will someone who's gaslighting. So potentially will the narcissist, the psychopath, the Machiavellian type. Trust yourself. And I would add in there, trust your intuition. Very often that can be exceptionally important in life generally, and particularly in these situations. Beware if those alarm bells are ringing. Learn their patterns. While dark empaths can be intelligent and creative, their motivations are relatively simplistic. You can learn to understand their patterns and tactics so that when they attempt them again in a new situation, you can immediately see it and shut it down or remove yourself from it. Yeah, the motivations are relatively simplistic. Sometimes you can learn to understand the patterns and tactics. Yes, that's important to look out for. Learn the patterns. Totally agree. Practice grey rocking. What on earth does that mean? A strategy for dealing with the guilt trips and gaslighting often used by dark empaths and narcissists. Grey rocking involves going to, I suppose, a discotheque where there are lots of pensioners. No, it doesn't, and that's probably a slur and a label that I shouldn't be applying. Grey rocking involves trying not to feed into the pattern the dark empath wants. When they say or do things to elicit a strong emotional response from you, you instead are unfazed, uninterested, unbothered. You don't feel the interaction and don't offer unnecessary information. That's easier said than done. It's good advice, but I think what I would like to highlight, and I'll come on to it here, is this is to do with emotions, our emotions. That's where we can really make ourselves. It's not as much grey rocking as about this sort of concept that we become so uninteresting to a potential predator that they move on. But when there is an emotional game being played, we've got to distance ourselves emotionally. Again, we will come back to that. From this article, we get this little scenario. Imagine you told a colleague about your new job. You were excited about the role, but also nervous about the transition. As you opened up and shared how you felt, they congratulated you, but said, "Don't you really struggle with self-confidence? I know you've shared this with me in the past. Hopefully it won't affect your performance. Wouldn't it be better to stick to what you know in this role here?" Well, this comment is rude and uncalled for. The underlying tone of this response might be even more sinister. This person could be a dark empath, but maybe not. Again, caution, labeling, categorizing people, which we do. We've got to do it to survive, but because it's a habit, we've also got to be careful. Could be this person's trying to help you, trying to protect you, knowing that maybe the job could be beyond what you're capable of. Maybe they're saying it because they are worried that you'll move on and it's their comfort zone and potential loss of colleague and friend that's bothering them. A little bit self-centered, but it doesn't mean they say they're a dark empath. So again, it's back to that idea of let's be careful about bandying around phrases, labels, etc. And again, from the same article, their version, dark empath, is a person who understands another person's emotions but doesn't experience those feelings. I'm not sure I agree with that. I think they do. I think this is the key. They do experience the feelings. But anyway, though they may pretend like they care about what you're going through, they would rather use your emotions to manipulate you. They use these relationships to take advantage of people when they are most vulnerable, potentially. Where a regular empath feels with you to be comforting and supportive, dark empaths avoid getting too close. I think that's probably true. They will share surface level things, but and they will appear to be close, but they're not sharing everything. They exhibit an emotional distance disguised as charm and understanding. Fair enough. It is usually motivated by personal gain. Fair enough. Think of this more as the dark side of empathy. Again, the dark empath, dark empathy. As Psych2Go explains from the same article, dark empaths often use cognitive empathy to their advantage, meaning they know what it is you want and feel, but dark empaths may use it against you. Yes, and you see in the same article, it says they use cognitive empathy to their advantage, meaning they know what it is you want and feel, but I don't think they're getting the what you want and feel simply from cognition. And yes, it can be used against us. They weaponize your feelings. This is what makes a dark empath dark. Rather than exercise emotional or compassionate empathy, dark empaths employ cognitive empathy. They also employ effective empathy, in my opinion. By doing this, they're able to maintain emotional distance so they can position and prepare themselves to react and use your emotions against you. If someone has ever left you feeling played or shamed over sharing something with them, you've probably encountered a dark empath. Probably not. You probably have, you probably haven't. We don't know. Again, let's be careful of the labels. Common manipulation tactics use gossiping, negatively talking about someone behind their back, sarcasm, conveying contempt through irony, love bombing, excessive attention and affection towards someone. Now, the key here, I believe, is that, and this list goes on, I've just sort of picked out a little bit from the list, but every other part of the list, what I'm about to say, could apply. This need be nothing to do with dark empathy or dark empaths. Everybody gossips. Some studies suggest a bit of gossip is good, healthy. Sarcasm. Yeah, sarcasm can be healthy. It can prick pomposity, love bombing, excessive attention and affection. It could be love. You know, it doesn't have to be dark empathy, but I appreciate the context within which this article was written. And then we get on to this article, The Dark Empath, How to Detect, Deal with This Dangerous Personality. Dark empaths have been described as people who use their empathy, i.e. the ability to detect and understand others' feelings and emotions. Yes, definitely. Not to help others, but instead to manipulate others for personal gain. They can make you feel more understood and heard than you have ever been and give you the impression that they really care about you. It doesn't have to make you feel more understood and heard than you've ever been, just understood and heard. That is often enough. But in the end, what they truly and maybe even solely care about is how you can help them achieve their financial, business, social, or whatever goals. Yes, I think that's the key here. That won't be 100% the case 100% of the time, but I think that's in the mix. I think it's a fair description of a direction of travel that they're often involved in. And then I've skipped on here. So it says that's not the case with dark empaths, but what I want to get on to is this bit, who typically only have cognitive empathy, which allows them to manipulate others without feeling the consequences of doing so. But they don't only have cognitive empathy. We'll come on to that just in a couple of seconds. Of course, dark empaths may claim that they have other types of empathy because their cognitive empathy tells them that it's what others want to see. After all, who wants to hear, I know what's causing you pain and how to help you, but frankly, I don't give a bleep. So in other words, this article is suggesting that it's cognition that's allowing them to work out the feelings so that they can say, you know, I know what's causing you pain and how to help you, and you know, I'm here to help, rather than frankly, I don't give a bleep. Well, let's go back here. This we did cover in the first video about the dark empath, which has been written by the original researchers. Let's go back to this bit. As expected, we found a traditional dark triad group with low scores in empathy, about 13% of the sample. We also found a group with lower to average levels across all traits, 34%, typicals, many of us, and a group with low dark traits and high levels of empathy, the empaths, many others. However, the fourth group of people, the dark empaths, was evident. They had higher scores on both dark traits, dark triad traits, and empathy. They were 20% of the sample. Interestingly, and this is the key, this latter group, these are the dark empaths, scored higher on both cognitive and affective empathy than the dark triad and the typical groups. So they score higher on emotional empathy than typicals, but probably lower than people who are the empaths, but higher than the typicals. So they score higher on emotional empathy, so they have it. So this stuff about it's all cognition, I don't think it's true. It's not, but it's what they're doing with it, I believe, is the key. And I've talked about in more than one video and in different ways about emotions, but if we consider that there's this sort of battle, and I'm being very basic here, between cognition and emotion. So if let's imagine these are two forces pushing against one another, and this is emotion and this is logic. And we know, most of us at least know, that when our emotions overpower our ability to think logically, then we can be irrational, we can be manipulated, we can do daft things, we can do impulsive things, we can do glorious things, but they're emotionally driven. So when those emotions overpower, then we can lose the ability to think more widely, to consider things in a more nuanced way. If we're too logical, then we can forget things like empathy. We can forget to consider the feelings of others. So this sort of war goes on. It kind of rages, particularly when the situation we're in is emotionally charged. And I'm going to suggest that what is actually happening with, let's say, a traditional psychopath, and I'm not alone in thinking this, is that the emotions are there, but they're quarantined and directed perhaps more towards aggression, more towards defending territory. That's how they come out. And so there's a logical output, which is, hey, I'm being transgressed against. Output with emotion is to attack. The research that has been done recently, that I was just quoting from, I believe is telling us that, yes, the dark triad individuals, and let's focus on the psychopath in this case, they want to manipulate, perhaps, they have superficial charm, but what they're doing is logically they can look at individuals and they can say, I can work you out. But they've got the additional skill or power, weapon perhaps, if you want to think of it that way around, of feeling, putting themselves in the other individual's shoes. So they feel it. They have cognitive and affective empathy. But remember I said a little while ago that if we take compassion and put it out there and say it's an outcome of empathy, if we put those two pieces of empathy together and we hand them to, they're allowed to exist in the dark empath, the person who may have many of these dark triad features. But again, let's just focus on psychopathy for a second. What does it give them? It gives them massive insight. They can work things out logically, figuring out a frame or frames of reference, but they can also think, oh, you feel like that. And they have to feel it to a degree. But probably they're not overpowered. They're holding it. But it's not like the typical psychopath directed towards aggression in that sense. They're not as aggressive. But it could come out in, like a snarky comment and pushing the buttons and knowing where to hurt us. So that aggression could come out that way. But that comes from insight. That comes from feeling and thinking, oh, if I said that, I'd feel like that. And so I know to say that to you because I know how you're going to feel. Those extra insights, that extra information is so powerful and potentially so dangerous. And again, from that earlier research, this is what they suggested, that they weren't as overtly aggressive, but the aggression could come out in different ways. And they were higher in agreeableness, so they're good at connecting with people and being an extrovert. And also that they may experience neuroticism. So they've got this churn inside about themselves and maybe beating themselves up or maybe getting angry about those people around them. But my point is, if we separate out compassion and say this is the action of this empathy, then we have people who can feel all that stuff, huge insights they can get about other people. But the compassion, the action part, is directed not to help other people. So it's not about the compassionate empathy. It's not. The compassion is that action from empathy. And so what could we call it? Well, not compassionate empathy. That's one of the reasons I think it's wrong to say compassion is empathy. It's an output from emotional, cognitive empathy. And that output, in my opinion, from someone, or at least some people who are in that dark empathy zone, is more like self-centered compassion. That's the output. Self-centered compassion. So both cognitive and affective or emotional empathy, but the output not compassion to help other people, The action is self-centered compassion. What can I get out of this with this information? How can I help me? Anyway, to finish off, I promised you a little list, recognizing and dealing with the dark empath. So picking up on some of the things that other people have written, beware of jumping to conclusions and or labeling. So important in life anyway. You know, a lot of people who are psychopaths in that dark triad, psychopathic traits, etc., are in society. They're doing good, they're not dangerous, and they can really help. And people who can process emotions differently can, in many different situations, be a huge advantage to each and every one of us, because they can keep cool in situations that we might not be able to. And of course, yes, there's a damaging aspect to that, but we got to be careful. I don't think we should stigmatize others. We should be careful of those who predate or would like to predate against us, of course, but let's be careful of stigma. And be cautious of confirmation bias. You know, it's like, oh, everyone's got ADHD. Have they really? Sure? Is that the case? So we hear this term, dark empathy, a dark empath, and we're looking for it. And as was alluded to in some of those articles, somebody does something, maybe they're having a bad day, maybe we're having a bad day, maybe it's for other reasons entirely that they say something, they do something. Let's not be too quick to stick that post-it note on them. And then observe actual behaviours. This is us becoming more logical, not simply the explanation that you're provided with to explain those behaviours, because a lot of the people who are manipulative will give you a great explanation. Oh, it's because. But is that the case? So look out for what people are actually doing, not the explanation. Yeah, listen to it. But then, next point, look for repetition and patterns. If this is going on, or you did it again, or here's the explanation again, or here's a different version of that. Oh, wait a minute, this is 10 times this has happened. How many explanations am I going to get? You said this would change. You said that this was something you knew bothered me or worried me or concerned me, but you're doing it again. What is going on? So look for the repetitions of the behaviours and the repetition of the explanation. Very often it can be the same, but it can also be different explanations, and thus from that potentially patterns of behaviours, patterns of stimulus reaction. How are they behaving in these different scenarios? And once you spot that can be very insightful. Forewarned is forearmed. Don't become isolated. Talk to people. One of the strategies of a lot of these people who would predate upon us is to do with isolation. And that can help with gaslighting. It can help with a sense of lacking any agency in our lives. So do not. If you're finding yourself being isolated, then we'll do something about it. So we have this other point here. Speak to others. Share your concerns. Speak to others who in confidence. Make sure you know who you're speaking to. Make sure they've got a track record of keeping things confidential, and that their only agenda is to help you. They're not some sort of political animal. They're not themselves a Machiavellian type. Speak to others, trusted friends. And obviously, at any point in this, seek professional help and share. Again, don't become isolated. Share. In the middle of this, trust your intuition, as I've mentioned as well. React less and respond more. And what I'm talking about there is if you buy in to the emotions of the situation, then the other person is watching you. They're looking at your habits, how you behave, and those patterns. And they begin to build up a picture of, well, if I can press this button, you'll react that way. And you can become more easily manipulated. In fact, you can become manipulated, full stop. And so it's really important to, in terms of the emotion and logic, not to allow those emotions to overpower us, you, me. because then we're much more likely to be manipulated. And so I talk about reacting as being something that could be described as an emotional reaction with not a lot of thought and more primitive behaviours. Responding implies, in my language, consideration, cognition, looking at the bigger picture, thinking things through, being more nuanced and subtle in our thought processes. And I've talked about reacting and responding in the past because I think it's important, but maybe that is worth covering in a separate video and giving that a little bit of more time and space to explore. Anyway, I hope you found that useful. If you're still with the video, thanks very much. If you have subscribed to the channel, again, thank you so very much. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't subscribed, please consider doing so, because again, that can be beneficial in so many different ways. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like and let me know what you think. For the moment, from me, bye for now.